Hey friends, welcome back to the Nourished Child Podcast. Jill here, and I'm delighted to have my guest today on the show, Sharon Lemons. She is a registered dietitian, but she specializes in autism and has herself raised two young men, both with autism. And she comes on the show to share her perspective as a mother, but also as a professional who works with individuals with autism. She was a mother of three boys. When they were 7, 5, and 1 week, her two older children were diagnosed with autism. This was at a time when the diagnosis was still rare and interventions were new, expensive, and not always helpful. Sharon refused to let her children become another statistic and was determined to see them live healthy, successful lives. She did her research on autism, developed strategies to help her children achieve optimum wellness and move forward towards autonomy. As she began to realize how important nutrition was to their wellness and success, she earned first a bachelor's degree in dietetics, then a master's degree in nutrition, becoming a dietitian nutritionist specializing in behavioral health. She shares her more than 30 years of experience in helping families and caregivers of individuals with autism and other behavioral challenges prepare their loved one for the ultimate goal, living a healthy and autonomous life. I think you will really enjoy this show, whether you're a parent of a child on the spectrum or you're a professional who works with children on the spectrum. I hope you tune into this show and gain just a wealth of knowledge from Sharon. She's very practical. She's lived this. She works day to day with individuals on the spectrum. She's written a book called Autism Recipe, Using Trust and Joy to Take Control of Wellness. And again, she's just got such a wealth of knowledge. I hope you enjoy this show. I will see you on the backside, but enjoy Sharon. Hi, Sharon. Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast.
Glad to be here, Jill.
It's nice to have you on the show. We've known each other for many years, and you have a new book out called Autism Recipe, Using Trust and Joy to Take Control of Wellness. And I'm thrilled to have you on the show today because I've never really talked about autism on the show. And I think that this will be super useful for families and healthcare providers out there. But before we get into our questions, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and through the lens of writing this book and the work that you do and sort of the personal experience that you have with autism as well?
Well, I am, first of all, the mother of 3 children, 2 of which have autism. They are 39 and 40. So we have a bit of time under our wigs here. And so this is obviously where I got interested in autism was my own children. And it was during the time that we were going through schooling and that kind of stuff that I went back to school to become a dietitian. And as time went by, I realized that there was things that needed to happen in the world of autism related to nutrition, as well as a lot of the educational things that went on. We definitely had some health challenges with our oldest son, and they are very different. Okay, our oldest son had some health challenges. He was allergic to everything, it seemed like, including corn. Okay. But he was allergic to all kinds of things. And we had, all kinds of health issues due to mainly his allergies. But that became a barrier. Eating was always a challenge. We didn't quite have the typical food recall that many of the parents give me. Many of the parents give me this typical food recall that includes 3 foods. Okay. And frequently it's what some of the parents have started calling the national food of autism, the chicken nugget.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, that was from a specific fast food restaurant, and a French fry. And typically, that was from a different fast food restaurant. And then something crunchy, like a goldfish cracker or a Teddy Graham or something like that. And that was basically all they'd eat. Well, this told me a couple of things. First of all, all right, they had some nutritional challenges going on. We were not getting these kids nourished.
Yeah.
Because you can't do that on those 3 items, but also you had parents that were determined enough to have their children eat 2 foods at one time that they would go to 2 different fast food restaurants to pull it off.
Yeah.
So, parents work really hard at trying to do what is best for their children. And many times, they feel all kinds of pressure from us, the professionals, whether it's the dietitian or the pediatrician or the school administrator that's putting them under some sort of pressure, and they feel judged.
Sure.
Because here their child only eats a couple of foods and they're struggling to just keep in enough calories to even keep them on the chart.
Yeah.
And but yet we'd like to see them nourished with vitamins and minerals and fiber and those kinds of things. And that's really, really difficult when your child is more than picky eater. They're a problem or resistant eater, or whatever term you want to put with that. They are just so overwhelmed by this, and mealtime becomes adversarial.
Yeah.
Because they want their child to eat. They're trying to do what the professionals are encouraging them to do, but yet their child is resistant. Well, you and I know, because we've read those studies, how many benefits there are to eating together as a family.
Yeah.
And one of my big concerns is, as this relationship gets adversarial at the table, what happens to the benefits that we are expecting to happen because they're at the table?
Right.
Not only for the children, but for their parents and for their siblings.
Yeah. So, Sharon, let's back up for just a second and talk about autism. And what is it? How does it present? And just to give everybody who's listening sort of an even sort of ground to stand on. So let's take it from like the global perspective. What is autism? Why is it affecting children? How does it show up?
It shows up generally because of some developmental delays. They're not talking on the right timeline. Sometimes some of their developmental milestones are early. Richard actually took steps across the floor when he was 7 months old.
Wow.
Yeah. I think I went as pale as a sheet. Nobody wants their child walking that early, but yet Jason didn't walk until he was like 13 months old. So their developmental milestones are not on target. And sometimes they're early and sometimes they're late. And much of that has to do with the sensory issues that they're having. And the way it was explained to me, back when they started checking into sensory issues, there was a book written by, I think her name was Jane Ayers, ERS. And they started doing testing, sensory integration testing, and that kind of thing. And what they explained to me was that people with autism have either hyper or hypo senses on all of their senses. Okay. Whether we're talking taste, smell, touch. So they have a tendency to not be able to have those typical interactions with their parents, the hugging, that kind of stuff, because that's overwhelming to them. Okay. And, all the people around them, the grandparents and all those kind of things. So this suddenly starts building some barriers here, right? But this also goes into the smell and the taste as well. And I think many of these sensory issues develop into fears where they become afraid of trying new things. Like I said, it could be too little sensation, too much sensation, and they don't know how things are going to feel. They don't know how things are going to affect them whenever they smell it. Sometimes the smell is overwhelming. Sometimes they don't even notice the smell at all.
Yeah.
So this affects absolutely every single sense. So when we say somebody has sensory issues, basically that means that their sensory system is skewed.
Yeah. So when you reflect back on your own experience with your two boys, what did you see? I mean, I'm assuming that each child with autism is different, right? They're sensory.
Extremely different. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's difficult for a parent, right? But B, I'm curious sort of what you see as common presenting. So as a dietitian who's going to be seeing children with autism, what do they typically come to you for?
Most of the time it starts off with picky eating. They're only eating those 3 things.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to try to find some different ways. And the picky eating is frequently not just me. Okay. But generally there's some sort of feeding therapist along with me, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist. And occasionally we even have a physical therapist in the mix. Right. To help work on those sensory issues and get them through some of the sensory issues. But because they haven't learned to put all the foods in their mouth at the time that the typical child would, they also don't have those oral motor skills to chew and swallow at the same time others do. So sometimes you will see a child that you would think had all of those skills down by now, like 2 or 3 years old, and they're still back at the level to where they're just learning to chew food at the front of the mouth. That's where chewing starts, is at the front of the mouth, right? And they haven't learned to rotate their jaw and chew a little more and those kinds of things. And they have learned to only accept the foods they can predict.
Yes.
Okay. So if it's something they can't predict what it's going to be like in their mouth, they frequently reject it.
Yeah.
So much of the time, what you're doing initially nutritionally with these kids is trying to find a way to get some of those foods near their mouth, get them used to the smells, get them used to the textures, those kinds of things, sometimes without ever getting them in their mouth.
Yeah.
Learning the texture of a food doesn't necessarily mean it has to go in the mouth.
Right.
They can mash on it. They can chop it up. They can do all kinds of things, I I I have discovered that there is a Pinterest recipe for every kind of Play-Doh under the sun that has all kinds of flavors and smells and those kinds of things to it, and edible Play-Dohs. And if you can get them touching those kinds of things, just so they get used to the smell and sometimes the texture, right? I mean, not everything's going to convert into the same texture when you put it into a Play-Doh form, but
Right.
sometimes they get some of the texture. One of the ones that I like to do is sweet potatoes. And with that, you're going to put in like the pumpkin pie seasoning, that kind of thing. And they're going to at least learn by messing with this Play-Doh how to be close to something that smells like pumpkin pie. So if all you've accomplished by playing with this Play-Doh that, it's got pumpkin in it and it smells like pumpkin pie or sweet potatoes and it smells, it's got the cinnamon flavor, that kind of stuff, is this child is able to sit near grandma who's eating her favorite food at Thanksgiving. You've done an awful lot.
Okay. So they're coming in oftentimes with picky eating. Are there other eating behaviors or food behaviors that are common to children with autism?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the common things that that we have is an adherence to one texture or the other. Okay. I quite literally had a kid I saw whose only foods that he would eat were the Chips Ahoy cookies. Remember the original Chips Ahoy cookies that were always super crunchy? Okay.
Yeah.
He would drink Pediasure, which was great for his nutrition because we were at least getting some nutrition down him, right? We were getting some calories and some protein and, that kind of stuff. And he would sneak the dog's dog food, because it was the same crunchy texture as the Chips Ahoy cookie. So, it's that adherence to those particular textures is, a major thing that happens there. And I've seen this in little bitty kids, right? But as I have gone through my career and I have gone to work with adults with autism, sometimes 50, 60-year-old adults, if this has not been addressed, you know what they're doing? They're eating the same foods. Nobody has worked them through it. They're still afraid of those foods. And they quite literally will tell me, but you don't understand. I have autism. I can't eat those foods. It's just too scary for me. So we have to work to try to find ways that are not quite so scary for them.
Yeah. So I imagine that listeners out there are trying to, at this moment, reconcile a child with autism who's only eating 3 foods or eating the same textured foods and is not expanding their palate. How do you actually make sure that they are nourished and well?
That's as a dietitian, that becomes your priority. Your priority is to get them nourished. Many times it's the feeding team, the occupational therapists, the speech therapists who are working on those sensory issues. Not that a dietitian can't, but it's going to be partly, more their or area sometimes. But the dietitian's area is going to be trying to figure out a way to get as much nutrition as you can. And sometimes the answer to that is going to be using some of those supplements, the Pediasure, Kate's Farm. whatever supplement there is to help get in enough vitamins and minerals and fiber and those kinds of things, because we want not only appropriate growth, but we want a healthy child.
Yeah.
The statistics show us that the health of these individuals as they get older is very impacted by the lack of a balanced nutritional program. There's a higher rate of GI issues. There's a higher rate of heart issues. There's a higher rate of diabetes. All of those kinds of things, those happen at a higher rate. And in fact, at the moment, the CDC, either the CDC or the NIH, it's on one of their websites, quotes the average life expectancy of somebody with autism to be 39. This is just outrageous to me. These individuals should not be having these short life expectancies. It's our responsibility as dietitians, healthcare professionals, whoever has an influence on these individuals, to work on getting their nutrition balanced enough to where they're healthy longer.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the autism itself is predisposing them to those kind of health conditions.
Mm-hmm.
What's predisposing them to those kind of health conditions is the lack of balance in their diet.
Parenting is always tough, especially when our kids are heading to school for the first time or heading back to school after their summer break. But if you're looking for a little support outside of the food and nutrition realm, I'd like to recommend the Project Parenthood podcast. Every week, Dr. Chelsea Dorsich gives parents actionable advice on everything from how to teach your children about body boundaries to digital safety. The best part? Episodes are under 20 minutes, so you can fit them into your busy schedule. Check out Project Parenthood on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening now. There are quite a few obstacles.
There's a lot of obstacles
that require a lot of time to overcome.
This is not a short-term thing. I tell people all the time, this is not a sprint. It is a marathon. It takes a long time to work through these issues.
So given your experience, you have a 40-year-old and a 39-year-old. Mm-hmm. What are sort of your top lessons learned as a mother and a professional around this marathon? Like, what can you tell listeners out there who may have children with autism?
Mm-hmm. I work on creating habits. One of the very first habits that I find that we need to work on is the habit of being willing to try a new food. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I always give them permission. If you don't like it, you don't have to take a second bite. If it's that bad, you can spit it out in a Kleenex or a cup or whatever. And I find that most of them, when you give them that permission and you give them that assurance that you're not going to make them eat this whole serving of stuff that they're absolutely terrified to even try, they're willing to, on their own, pick it up, put it in their mouth, and try it out. And sometimes we can actually add it to the menu. It also has the effect of taking away the stress at the table that we were talking about.
Yeah.
We want to bring back those health benefits of being able to eat together, and you and I know that not everybody eats at the table together every single day. Okay. My family does, but that's something that we committed to. And I acknowledge that not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
It gives them this benefit of building these habits of, okay, I'm willing to do this. I feel safe doing this. And I have even found that the individuals I've worked with who aren't my children, who are adults, in some of the programs I work with, have used these skills of being willing to try something new, and creating a habit of trying something new, and knowing they have permission to say, I can't do this another step kind of thing, that they have been willing to do things like learn to drive cars, go out and try some new social experiences, those kinds of things. So building those habits of saying, okay, it's okay for me to accept this, but it's okay for me to have a boundary and say, nope, this just got overwhelming. I'm done. You know, that gives them permission to try those things. And you're much more likely to get those new foods in them, or get them experiencing new experiences if you give them that freedom to back out and let them know that they're the ones that set the boundaries, and you're going to respect those boundaries. I find that many that I work with professionally have never, and not in their memory, they've never eaten sitting next to somebody.
Really?
Yeah, they've never eaten sitting next to somebody. So, nor have they sat next to somebody while they were eating. So many times, what I'm starting off with is just getting them to sit next to somebody while they're consuming something, even if they both sit down and drink a glass of water. That they feel comfortable with this person, that this person is going to work with them on their anxiety and their fears, and they're going to be okay trying these new experiences sitting next to somebody. And I have found that to be one of the most beneficial things that I've been able to do with some of the individuals I work with, is just get them comfortable being next to somebody while they're trying something new, like trying a new food.
Yeah. I imagine that for any child with or without autism, eating in isolation doesn't help them.
No.
It doesn't help them connect. It doesn't help them enjoy the meal. It doesn't help them feel secure and safe.
Right. And I mean, think how isolating it is if you never go to any social, event that includes food. How many of our social events do not include food?
Can't think of any.
Yeah. Yeah. So that means that if they can't sit next to somebody while they eat, whether it's them eating or while the other person eats, they've become isolated. And the more they're isolated, the less advancement happens in their social skills. And social skills is one of the, if not the top, most challenging skill for somebody with autism.
And why is that, Sharon?
It's, many of the things we've already talked about, how they don't know how to interact. They've got these fears, and they just aren't sure of the interactions. So, they need to be able to, learn to do things like, taking turns is not just taking turns in a game. It's taking turns in communication, right? It's taking turns in a line, as you're going into someplace, all those kinds of things. So we need to figure out ways to make these individuals feel safe enough to where they can be in social situations and learn these skills, because they're just afraid.
Yeah.
So we need to work on how can we make them feel safe and bring them in, and learn things like, joking with each other. I mean, how boring is life if you can't joke with somebody?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that in itself is a turn taking opportunity, isn't it? They don't make those connections. They tend to not make eye contact. Many of them, and I've had a number of them talk to me and say, I can't make eye contact with you when you're trying to teach me something new, because if they have to concentrate on making eye contact and they have to concentrate on what you're teaching them that's new, that's too much.
Mm-hmm.
So they can concentrate on what you're trying to teach them if you allow them to look someplace else,
Mm-hmm.
instead of having to try to add this other skill as well. So it's always a good idea with individuals with autism, with anybody with a neurodivergency, right? To challenge one skill at a time.
Yeah.
If you're challenging two, it's too much.
It's a sensory overload.
Yeah, it overloads them. They can't do it. And then maybe as time goes on, you might be able to teach them to do two skills at one time, but that's an advanced skill. That's not going to happen right away.
Right. Right. So, Sharon, in your book, you talk about the dinner table, the meal table being sort of this platform or this integral part of care for individuals with autism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, what we have done in our family is we have made this, the center of where we work on new skills, where we work on creating balance in their diet, where we create balance in life, because that's where we're most likely to have spent enough time with them for them to be able to come up with whatever was challenging for them that day. If you don't sit down with them in the same spot, then if something's been happening that day that was a challenge for them, they probably are not going to manage to put the words together and tell you. I mean, one of the examples that I give in the book is there was a fire alarm going off at school, and Jason come in, and we were sitting there at the table, and we'd been, nearly to the end of the meal, and he says, the fire alarms went off today. And I said, okay, they did. Yeah. They told us to disregard the fire alarms. Well, when he mentioned it twice, I knew this was more than just a casual mention. This was a problem. He's overwhelmed, So we were able to figure out that there was something major going on with the fire alarms. And in this particular case, what had happened was the fire alarms were malfunctioning. So they got on the loudspeaker and they said, disregard the fire alarms. Well, for somebody who's used to following every single rule, every single moment, to say disregard the fire alarms, he didn't know how to cope with that, And we had to have an IEP meeting, an individual educational plan meeting, to sit down and work out a plan with his teachers. Well, if we hadn't have had this habit of sitting down and, just spending time with them, we never would have figured out that something major was going on. So we use it that way, but we also do things like, we will literally plan out meals. Okay. We divide up cooking duties as well. At one point we looked around here and there was 5 adult-sized people. The youngest, and at times he was an adult still living here, or that we had 5 adults in the house, and everybody was running around like crazy trying to get things done. And we divided up the meals, and every day different person cooked during the week, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I mean, like most families, on the weekends, there was at least one day where there was a social thing we had to take care of. And then the extra day, either myself or my husband cooked,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So in reality, I probably cook less than my boys with autism at times because they tend to be here first.
Yeah.
So they start the meal. We have learned to teach them how to go through these recipes and learn the different skills by incorporating these conversations at the table. And, what do you want to try cooking? And we'll look at recipes and we'll say, is there something you want to try? And maybe they will have eaten something at school or with a friend, or, um, you know, uh, Jason he loves to go out to eat with these coworkers these days. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes he goes to restaurants that we don't go to,
Mm-hmm.
but yet he wants to try some of those foods
Mm-hmm.
that he's eaten at these restaurants. He wants us to make them.
Yeah.
So we'll come up with these recipes, and we literally sit down and we say, okay, here's a protein, here's a starch, here's a non-starchy vegetable. Every meal has to have a non-starchy vegetable. Most of the time, I let them get away with not doing that on Taco Tuesday, and Jason is addicted to Taco Tuesday. So I don't necessarily make them do a non-starchy vegetable on Taco Tuesday. I give them a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of decision making, but the rest of the time, there's always a non-starchy vegetable. Now, if you look at the book, you're going to figure out that that's generally either a carrot or a salad. But
Mm-hmm.
hey, it's a non-starchy vegetable, and we're getting some fiber in there, and those kinds of things. So yeah, we use that to plan all of those meals like that, and we rarely actually go out to eat unless it's a social event with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Because he knows when he gets home, Jason gets home first. When he gets home, that we need to be cooking. And when I get here, even if it's my turn to cook, the food is already, set in the spot where it needs to be for me to start cooking.
Right.
So we use that to develop those habits.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, have conversations, that's we also will have health conversations at the table,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Which really sounds like a great place to communicate and
Yeah.
to connect and to, teach about behaviors that you want,
Mm-hmm.
are good for your boys, your men. One
Yeah,
of the things,
there are men these days.
yeah, they're men. They're men. One of the things you say in the book is that your overarching goal is to raise kids with autism who are healthy and autonomous. And it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like you've done that with your
To a
own
large
boys.
degree, no matter who you are, eventually you will not be here. That may be something that's kind of shocking for people to think about, but the likelihood is our children are going to outlive us, right? That's a fact of life.
Mm-hmm.
So we want them to have all the skills they need to keep up this healthy style of living when we can no longer do any of the cooking,
Mm-hmm.
or when, we're no longer here, when they're living on their own. And we don't have a timeline for them as to when they need to move out of the house, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And we're still teaching skills,
Yeah.
so we're fine where we're at,
Mm-hmm.
as far as that goes. But yeah, we want them to be able to do all those things that need to happen. We also will take the opportunity at the table to discuss things like oh, Jason, you had the bill come in for your Part D, a Medicare insurance to cover your prescriptions. Let's make sure it actually came out of your checking account. And, so we do those kinds of things where we're talking about, all the things that they need to make sure happens,
Yeah.
whether it's, house cleaning chores or lawn chores or paying bills or whatever, we want them to have those skills. And we take that time we're together at the table to work on those things and make sure that they have a concept of, this is not something that happens on its own.
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't magically happen. We have to make sure that it's happening. So one of the things that I was taught many years ago is you shouldn't do for a child something they can do for themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that applies to all human beings.
Yeah.
If you've got an elderly person, the thing that's most disabling to them is you suddenly start doing all the stuff for them. Right.
Right.
So if it's something that they can do, then we work to make sure that they are doing it, whether it's, calling for their own doctor's appointments or calling in their own prescriptions or, deciding which color paint to paint their room because their room needs to be painted. Those kinds of things. We use that table experience to work through all those independent living skills so that they can live autonomously. And I mean, to me, the difference between independent is, what, they live pretty darn independently here. They do whatever they want, but autonomously means that they not only are doing whatever they want, but they're also taking care of all the things that they need to do in order to maintain their health and financial status and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, I mean, you've written an awesome book, and it's a very hopeful book for parents out there, I think. Where can people who are listening to this podcast who might want to get in touch with you connect with you, and where can they find your book?
The book is on Amazon. And I'm actually going to work to try to get it a couple of other places now. But it is on Amazon. It's available in the Kindle and paperback. If they want to email me, they can email me at autismrd@outlook.com. I'm on social media, Twitter, I'm Lemons Autism RD. So
awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your book and your experiences as a mom, but also as a dietitian. I think it's remarkable and a testimony to living your advice in how your boys have grown up and become healthy and autonomous, just like you hope all your patients will become. So
exactly. Yeah. My hope is not just for my children, but I really want to see this happening within the autism community. Some of those things that we were talking about, the increase in heart disease and diabetes and all of those kinds of things. I want to see that normalize.
Yeah.
I want to see it come back down to the national average, because I don't feel there's any reason it shouldn't be down at the national average. I mean, yes, there are some people with autism who have more health issues. Just genetically, they have, more predisposition to things like GI issues or allergies or that kind of stuff. And that is true. That is true. But I'd like to see it come at least closer down to the national average.
Yeah. Yeah. A worthy endeavor. Sharon, thank you so much for coming on the Nourished Child podcast. It's great to see your face and to have this conversation, and best of luck with the book. I hope everyone out there who's listening to this show goes and checks it out on Amazon and buys a copy.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one. Thanks for joining me today, friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Sharon. Again, she is a wealth of knowledge. Please be sure to check out her book, Autism Recipe. You can find it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. I've also included a link in the show notes so that you can just directly go and pick it up. And if you have a chance to read Kids Thrive at Every Size, please leave me a review on Amazon. It really does help others find this book. And also, remember, I do offer private services for a limited number of families. If you are raising a smaller or larger child and you need help, give me a shout. You can check out my offerings over on jillcastle.com, or you can find them also on thenourishedchild.com. That's it for today, folks. I hope you have a lovely week. And remember, give that child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.